It was the kind of courtroom where every detail mattered. The polished oak of the benches, the crisp sound of shoes on the floor, and the quiet murmur of attorneys preparing their cases. Chloe Matthews, a young black attorney with a sharp mind and a heart full of determination, sat quietly at her desk. Today was supposed to be just another day in her burgeoning legal career. But it would soon become a day that would alter the course of her life forever. Chloe adjusted the silver cross hanging from her neck, a constant companion since childhood. The symbol was more than just a religious token, it was a reminder of her roots, of the woman who raised her, of the faith that had always kept her grounded. Her grandmother had given it to her when she was young, telling her that no matter how tough life got, her faith would be the one thing that would never abandon her. Chloe had worn it every day since, even here in this courtroom, where every inch of her being had been scrutinized by her peers, and, most importantly, by the judge. Today, Judge Gregory Finns, a man whose reputation in the legal community was both respected and feared, was presiding over the case. The moment Chloe had stepped into the room, she had felt his eyes on her. Not in a way that made her feel seen as an equal, but in a way that made her feel other. It wasn't just that she was a black woman in a field dominated by white men, it was the way he looked at her cross, as if it were an insult. The trial had started like any other. The case was about a corporate breach of contract, but Chloe's opponent, a well-established lawyer named Richard Harris, was as aggressive as they come. He was used to bending the truth, twisting facts, and, if necessary, playing dirty. Chloe had already anticipated the tricks he'd try to pull. But she wasn't worried about him. It was Judge Finns who had her on edge. As the trial progressed, Chloe stood to present her argument. She spoke with passion, her voice steady and confident as she laid out her case for the breach of contract. The jury was attentive, and Chloe could feel the weight of her words landing with them. She was in her element. This was the moment she had been working toward her entire life. And then it happened. Judge Finns cleared his throat and interrupted her. His voice was cold, dismissive. "Ms. Matthews," he said, his tone sharp. "I must ask you to remove that necklace. It's distracting, and this courtroom is a place for professionalism, not religious displays." Chloe froze, her heart skipping a beat. She knew what he was referring to. The silver cross hanging from her neck. She had worn it every day since she could remember, but today, in this courtroom, it had become the center of attention. Her fingers instinctively touched it, her breath caught in her throat. She had been in many courtrooms before, but never had she felt more alienated. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," Chloe said, maintaining her composure, though her voice betrayed a hint of surprise. "This is a religious symbol, and it's very important to me. I'll leave it on, if that's okay with the court." Judge Finns narrowed his eyes at her, his lips curling into a thin, disapproving line. "Ms. Matthews, I'm giving you a direct order. Remove it. Now." The room grew quieter. Chloe felt every eye in the courtroom on her. She glanced at the jury, then at her colleagues, all of whom were silent, seemingly waiting for her response. Chloe could feel the weight of history pressing down on her. Her entire body tensed, but she stood tall, refusing to back down. "I'm afraid I cannot do that, Your Honor," she said firmly. "This cross represents my faith, and I will not remove it on the grounds of personal belief." Judge Finn's face reddened, and he slammed his gavel on the desk. "Contempt of court," he declared. "You will be fined $500 for defying my order." Chloe's heart sank. A fine. It wasn't just the money, it was the principle. She had been in this profession long enough to know that this wasn't just about a necklace. It was about power. It was about control. And it was about sending a message to her that, in this courtroom, she was not equal. As the session continued, Chloe's mind raced. The fine was one thing, but the message was much bigger. What kind of a world were they living in, where even the smallest expression of personal faith could be punished? She couldn't just let it slide. She couldn't let this moment define her. She knew that this wasn't about her cross, it was about something deeper, something more insidious. She had seen it in the way her colleagues treated her, the way her clients sometimes hesitated to trust her. She had seen it in the looks she received when she walked into the courtroom, the double standards that existed for someone like her. As the session ended, Chloe gathered her things, her mind still whirling with disbelief. The fine wasn't just an insult, it was a challenge. She couldn't let Judge Finns get away with this. She wouldn't. This wasn't just about her cross, or even about this case. It was about standing up for herself, standing up for what was right. Walking out of the courtroom, she knew she had a decision to make. She could let this slide, let this injustice pass without a word, and continue down the path of compliance and professionalism that she had always been taught to follow. Or she could take a stand. She could fight. And that's exactly what she decided to do. This wasn't just about a necklace. This was about everything she had worked for, the countless hours spent studying, the obstacles she had overcome as a black woman in a predominantly white profession, and the unwavering belief in the principles of justice that had brought her here in the first place. Chloe took a deep breath and made a vow to herself: she would not back down. She would not let Judge Finns or anyone else define who she was. She was a lawyer. She was a woman of faith. And she was about to make her voice heard. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Chloe Matthews sat in the quiet of her office, the afternoon light filtering in through the blinds. She gazed out the window, lost in thought, her fingers tracing the outline of the cross around her neck. The weight of the morning's events still hung heavily in the air. Judge Finn's harsh words echoed in her mind, but she knew she couldn't let them define her. She had spent too many years working hard to get where she was. This moment, no matter how difficult, wouldn't be the end of her. Chloe wasn't just any lawyer. She had fought tooth and nail to get to this point in her career. The road to becoming a legal professional had been long, filled with challenges that only someone like her, a young black woman in an overwhelmingly white field, could fully understand. She had always been an outsider in some way, whether it was at school, in law school, or even in her current job. But her drive, her determination to prove herself, had kept her going through it all. Chloe's childhood was a testament to resilience. Born in the heart of Detroit to a single mother who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, Chloe had learned early on the importance of perseverance. Her mother, Vivian, was a woman of extraordinary strength. She had always told Chloe that life would be hard, but as long as she stayed true to herself, nothing could break her. Vivian's words were the foundation of Chloe's confidence. Despite the odds stacked against them, Vivian made sure Chloe had everything she needed to succeed. Chloe didn't realize it at the time, but her mother's sacrifices were the stepping stones to Chloe's own future. At the age of 8, Chloe had her first experience with racism. It was an innocuous moment at first, a simple comment from a classmate that made her feel different. "Why do you always sit alone at lunch?" the girl had asked, her voice laced with curiosity and something else. "It's just that, you don't look like the rest of us." It was a small remark, but it stuck with Chloe for years. It was the first time she felt that sting of being seen as other. It wasn't just about the color of her skin, it was about the unspoken message that she wasn't supposed to belong. Her grandmother, Marie, had always been a pillar in Chloe's life. Marie was the one who raised Chloe when her mother was working late shifts. She had seen the world change in ways that made her cynical at times, but she had also seen the power of faith. It was Marie who gave Chloe her first cross, telling her, "This is more than a necklace, child. This is your strength. Whenever you feel lost, remember who you are and where you come from." Chloe treasured that gift. As a child, the cross had been a symbol of her connection to her grandmother, but as she grew older, it became something more. It was a reminder of the values that shaped her: perseverance, faith, and the belief that justice was worth fighting for. In high school, Chloe's academic talents became evident. She excelled in every subject, but it was law that caught her attention. She loved the idea of helping people, of fighting for the underdog. As a teenager, she often found herself reading about landmark cases and learning about the legal system. She dreamed of one day becoming a lawyer, someone who could stand up against injustice and make a real difference in people's lives. But Chloe quickly learned that even the dream of becoming a lawyer had its own set of obstacles. When she applied to law schools, Chloe faced rejection after rejection from prestigious institutions. It wasn't because she wasn't qualified, her grades were stellar, and her LSAT scores were among the best in her class. But the color of her skin, the subtle and not-so-subtle biases in the admission process, made it clear that she would have to work harder than most. After being rejected by a top-tier law school, she felt crushed. But her mother's words echoed in her mind, "Don't let them tell you who you are." Determined, Chloe applied to every law school that would have her. She ended up at Langston Law School, a solid institution with a reputation for accepting students from diverse backgrounds. It wasn't Harvard or Yale, but it was a place where Chloe could prove her worth. It was there, amid the sea of mostly white faces, that Chloe truly came into her own. She wasn't just a student, she was a force to be reckoned with. Her professors praised her work, and her classmates quickly realized that Chloe had something special. By the time Chloe graduated, she had built a reputation as a fierce advocate for her clients. But even in the courtroom, she felt like an outsider. Every time she walked in, she noticed the stares, the subtle and not-so-subtle judgment. The fact that she was a black woman in a field where women of color were still underrepresented meant that she constantly had to prove herself. The first few years were tough. She fought to earn respect, often being forced to work twice as hard as her peers to achieve the same recognition. It wasn't just the clients who doubted her, it was her colleagues, too. But Chloe never gave up. She never stopped fighting. Her grandmother's teachings, her mother's sacrifices, and the unwavering faith she carried with her kept her going. She could have easily walked away from the challenges, but she never did. Instead, she leaned into them. She embraced the discomfort of being different because she knew that, in the end, that difference was what would set her apart. Now, Chloe was at a crossroads. The case against Judge Finns was about more than just a fine. It was about the kind of person she wanted to be, the kind of lawyer she wanted to be. Would she let this man's narrow view of the world define her, or would she take a stand? As she sat in her office, thinking back to her childhood, her time in law school, and all the battles she had fought, Chloe knew she couldn't back down now. She had come too far, overcome too much, to let a moment like this be the one that broke her. She had learned one crucial lesson over the years: she was capable of far more than anyone had ever given her credit for. Chloe looked at the cross around her neck once again, feeling its weight in her hands. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol of everything she stood for. And it was about time she used that symbol to remind the world who she was, and what she was capable of. The days following the courtroom incident were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions for Chloe. The fine had left her shaken, but it wasn't the money that bothered her, it was the sense of injustice, the feeling that she had been targeted simply for wearing a symbol of her faith. She had spent her entire life navigating the complexities of being a black woman in a predominantly white field, and this moment felt like a direct attack on everything she had worked for. Chloe's colleagues at the law firm had been supportive, but in that polite, distant way that seemed more like an obligation than genuine solidarity. Some offered half-hearted words of encouragement, while others remained silent, perhaps unsure of what to say. But no one truly understood the weight of the situation, not in the way Chloe did. The next day, Chloe found herself sitting in her office, staring at the pile of case files in front of her. The corporate breach of contract case she had been working on had become secondary in her mind. The events with Judge Finns were consuming her thoughts, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play here. This wasn't just about a fine or a cross. It was about respect, equality, and standing up for what was right. She knew she had to make a decision, one that would affect her career, her future, and possibly her reputation. But the more Chloe thought about it, the clearer it became: she couldn't let this go. She couldn't just move on with her life, pretend like nothing had happened. Judge Finns had used his power to humiliate her, and that wasn't something she could overlook. Chloe wasn't one to back down from a challenge, and this was no exception. Her mind raced as she brainstormed her options. She could file a formal complaint against Judge Finns, but Chloe knew that would be a long, arduous process. The legal system wasn't quick to make changes, and there was a chance that filing the complaint could make her even more of an outcast in the legal community. She could also take the moral high ground and let the matter go, chalk it up to a moment of frustration in the courtroom, and move forward. But that didn't sit right with her either. The rising tension inside Chloe only grew as the days passed. The incident with the cross had triggered a deeper sense of conflict within her, a conflict that had been bubbling beneath the surface for years. She had always struggled with the duality of her identity. On one hand, she was a professional, a lawyer who had worked hard to get where she was. On the other, she was a black woman in a world that often made her feel invisible, disregarded, or, worse, less than. Chloe couldn't count the number of times she had walked into a courtroom, only to be greeted by skeptical glances, subtle snickers, or the unmistakable air of condescension from some of her peers. She was used to the whispered comments, the moments when someone assumed she didn't belong. But this time, the attack had come from a place of authority, from someone who was supposed to be impartial. Judge Finn's judgment hadn't just stung, it had cut deep, and the wound wouldn't heal without action. Her phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Rachel, a close friend from law school, who had been following the situation with Judge Finns closely. "Chloe, hey, I've been thinking about what happened in court the other day," Rachel said, her voice filled with concern. "I know it's a tough situation, but I want you to remember something. You've got the law on your side. You've got the right to express yourself. No one should be able to tell you that your faith doesn't belong in the courtroom." Chloe let out a sigh, grateful for Rachel's support. "I don't know, Rach. I'm torn. On the one hand, I want to stand up for myself. But on the other hand, I know what the repercussions could be. Do I really want to make an enemy of Judge Finns? He's got power in this legal community. If I push back, it could cost me more than just a case." Rachel was quiet for a moment before responding. "Chloe, you've been fighting against the odds your whole life. You didn't get here by playing it safe. You know the law, and you know your rights. But this isn't just about the law, it's about respect. If you let him get away with this, what does that say about you? What does it say about the system?" Chloe ran a hand through her hair, trying to process Rachel's words. It was true. She had fought against the odds before, whether it was battling the biases of her peers or dealing with the struggles of growing up in a world that wasn't always kind to people like her. This wasn't a fight she could walk away from. The more she thought about it, the more Chloe realized that taking a stand wasn't just for her, it was for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. "I'm not going to let him get away with this," Chloe said, her voice firm. "I'm going to fight, Rachel. It's time to make a stand. I won't let anyone take my dignity away, not in that courtroom, and not in this profession." Rachel let out a relieved breath. "I knew you'd come to that conclusion. You're stronger than you know, Chloe. And you've got the support of people who believe in you. You're not in this alone." The conversation ended with Chloe feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't alone. She had the law, her friends, and her own unshakable belief in what was right. This was about more than just a fine. It was about making sure that, in the end, justice truly prevailed. Chloe spent the rest of the afternoon preparing her case. She knew that if she was going to take on Judge Finns, she would need to be fully prepared, to anticipate every move and counter every argument. But it wasn't just about winning in court, it was about making a statement. A statement that her faith, her identity, and her dignity were not up for debate. She had faced adversity before. And now, it was time to rise. Chloe knew that taking a stand against Judge Finns was no small task. She wasn't just facing an individual, she was facing a system that often turned a blind eye to the struggles of those who weren't in positions of power. She'd spent years learning the ins and outs of the legal system, but this was different. This wasn't just about law, it was about something much deeper: equality, respect, and her right to exist authentically in spaces that hadn't always made room for people like her. As the days passed, Chloe immersed herself in preparation. Her office became a battlefield of case files, legal briefs, and research notes. She wasn't just looking for a technical argument, she was building a narrative. She knew that to win, she needed more than facts, she needed to make people feel what she had felt in that courtroom. The humiliation. The anger. The disbelief. She was working late one night when her phone buzzed. It was a text from Rachel. "Hey, just checking in. How are you holding up?" Chloe hesitated before replying. She'd been so focused on her case that she hadn't let anyone truly see how drained she felt. But there was something about Rachel's check-in that made her want to open up. "It's a lot, Rach. Honestly, I'm scared. Scared that if I push this too far, I'll lose everything. I've worked so hard to get here, and I'm terrified it'll all fall apart. But I know I can't just let it go. This is bigger than me. It's about showing the world that we deserve to be seen, to be heard, and to be treated with respect." Rachel replied almost instantly, "You've got this, Chloe. Remember, this isn't just about you. You're standing up for every person who's ever been overlooked, dismissed, or told they didn't belong. This is your time." Chloe let out a breath, staring at the glowing screen. It was exactly what she needed to hear. She'd been so caught up in her fear of failure that she'd forgotten why she started this fight in the first place. It wasn't about winning or losing, it was about making sure that something like this never happened again, to her or anyone else. The next morning, she walked into the courthouse with a renewed sense of determination. The usual heaviness of the building pressed against her, but today, she felt stronger. As she walked past the rows of lawyers and clients waiting for their cases to be called, she couldn't help but notice the looks. Some were curious, some judgmental, but all were watching. Chloe squared her shoulders, refusing to let their gazes rattle her. She had a job to do. When it was time for her case against Judge Finns to be heard, Chloe stood before the courtroom with an air of quiet confidence. She had spent weeks meticulously preparing, crafting her arguments and ensuring that every detail was in place. But it wasn't just the legal arguments she had to make, it was the emotional impact she needed to deliver. She couldn't let them forget what had happened, what had been said. She had to make them see the injustice for what it was. "Your Honor," Chloe began, her voice steady but strong. "I stand before you today not only as a lawyer but as a black woman who has fought every day of her life to be treated with dignity and respect. I am not here to debate legal technicalities or to win a mere case. I am here to say that what happened in this courtroom was wrong." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. The room was still, everyone hanging on her every syllable. Chloe could feel the weight of their gaze, but this time, it didn't scare her. Instead, it fueled her. "When I walked into this courtroom on that day, I was wearing a cross around my neck. This is not just a piece of jewelry, it is a symbol of my faith, my strength, and my identity. The moment it was called into question was the moment I was told that my faith, my identity, didn't belong here. It was a moment that I could not, and will not, ignore." Chloe's words resonated throughout the room. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for every person who had ever felt like they didn't belong, like they weren't welcome, or like they had to hide who they truly were to fit into the spaces they occupied. As the hearing continued, Chloe's arguments grew sharper, more focused. She highlighted case after case, showing how the law had always protected the rights of individuals to express their beliefs and identity in public spaces, including courtrooms. She pointed out that Judge Finn's actions had not only been a violation of her personal rights but also an infringement on the broader principle of fairness in the justice system. The tension in the room grew as Chloe built her case. She was confident, but even as she spoke, she felt a pang of anxiety creeping up. What if the judge didn't see it her way? What if he dismissed her arguments outright? But she couldn't let fear control her. She had come too far to stop now. Finally, the moment came for Judge Finns to respond. He sat at the bench, his face unreadable, and for a long moment, there was complete silence. Chloe held her breath, waiting for the verdict. "You may be right," Judge Finns said, his voice cold but measured. "But the matter at hand is not about your cross, Ms. Matthews. It's about courtroom decorum, and the way we conduct ourselves in this space. Religious symbols can create division, and that is not something we can afford in this courtroom." The word stung, but Chloe didn't back down. She knew she had made her point, and she wasn't going to let the judge's dismissal of her rights define the outcome. The fight wasn't over yet. If anything, it had only just begun. As she left the courtroom, Chloe felt the weight of the moment on her shoulders, but she also felt a spark of hope. She had stood up for herself, for her faith, and for everyone who had ever been silenced. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a step in the right direction. The journey was far from over. And Chloe was ready to face whatever came next. The days following Chloe's courtroom appearance were a blur. She barely remembered the walk back to her office, her mind still buzzing with the echoes of Judge Finn's words. Religious symbols can create division, he had said, as if the mere presence of her cross could tear the fabric of the court's decorum. His words felt like an affront to everything Chloe believed in. But more than that, it felt like the final confirmation that the fight wasn't just about her symbol, it was about her place in the world. As she sat in her office that evening, looking over her notes, Chloe was aware that she had made her stand. But what was the cost of standing up for herself? Was it worth it? The legal world she had spent years trying to infiltrate with dignity and hard work suddenly felt colder, more hostile. She could feel the walls closing in around her. Her phone buzzed again, this time it was a message from her mother. "Baby, I know you're tired, but I need you to remember something. Your faith and your identity are never wrong. You are not just fighting for yourself, you're fighting for those who can't speak up, those who will come after you. Your strength is going to make a difference." Chloe swallowed hard, a tear slipping down her cheek. She hadn't told her mother about the fine, about the feeling of being singled out in that courtroom. But her mother knew. Mothers always know. Chloe could almost hear her mother's voice, the same words she had spoken to her as a child when things got tough: "The road is hard, but your heart will light the way." The lump in her throat was so large she could barely breathe. It was that strange mix of anger, grief, and determination, feelings she had never quite known how to express until now. Her mother's words were a reminder that Chloe wasn't alone in this. Her mother's support, and the support of the few friends who truly understood her struggle, was the rope that was pulling her through the storm. But it wasn't just her mother who had inspired her. It was everyone who had been marginalized, overlooked, or dismissed because of their race, gender, or faith. Chloe felt the weight of their experiences like a heavy mantle resting on her shoulders. She wasn't just representing herself anymore, she was carrying the hopes of everyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. The emotional toll of the case began to take its toll on Chloe in ways she hadn't expected. Her friends at the law firm noticed her distraction. Rachel, the one person who had been unwavering in her support, had urged Chloe to take a break, but Chloe was relentless. She knew the stakes were too high, and the idea of walking away, of letting this injustice go unchallenged, was not an option. Her mind raced as she mentally reviewed her arguments, refining them, revisiting every piece of evidence. It felt like a never-ending loop. And then, the breakthrough came. Chloe had been reading through an old case about religious symbols in the workplace when she found a precedent she had missed before. It wasn't much, just a small footnote in a ruling from years ago. But it was enough. It was proof that the law had always upheld the right of individuals to wear religious symbols in public spaces, even in courtrooms. This was what Chloe needed. This was the piece of the puzzle that could shift everything in her favor. With trembling hands, she drafted a new motion, one that would bring the argument about religious freedom to the forefront. She wasn't just challenging a fine anymore, she was challenging the fundamental principles that the justice system was built on. It wasn't just about one judge's decision, it was about making sure the world understood that her faith wasn't a weapon to be used against her. It was a right, as sacred as her right to be treated equally under the law. As Chloe prepared to submit the motion, she couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. She had already given everything she had to this fight, her heart, her soul, her energy. The pain she had felt in that courtroom was still raw, but it was also the fuel that would propel her forward. She wasn't backing down. She wasn't going to let anyone tell her she didn't belong. That night, after sending off the motion, Chloe stood by her window, staring out at the city lights. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. Her faith, her identity, and her strength were her guiding lights. She wasn't fighting just for herself. She was fighting for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. The next morning, Chloe woke up to an email notification. The judge had responded. He had agreed to review the motion, and a hearing was scheduled for the following week. This was it, the moment that could change everything. Chloe's heart raced as she prepared for the next battle. She had no idea what would happen in the coming days, but one thing was certain, she was no longer the same person who had walked into that courtroom weeks ago. She had found her voice, and with it, the courage to face whatever came next. This was her fight. This was her journey. And she wasn't going to stop until justice was served. The hearing was set, and Chloe's nerves were at an all-time high. Her case against Judge Finns had taken on a life of its own. What had started as a personal challenge, one woman standing against the prejudice of a powerful figure, had grown into something larger. Chloe had tapped into the collective strength of everyone who had ever felt like they were silenced or marginalized. She wasn't just fighting for her right to wear a cross in court, she was fighting for everyone's right to exist authentically in a world that often told them not to. The morning of the hearing, Chloe stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, adjusting her suit. She was no longer just preparing for a courtroom battle, she was preparing for a moment of reckoning. The woman staring back at her wasn't the same person who had walked into that courtroom weeks ago. She had been changed by this experience. The fight, though exhausting, had given her a renewed sense of purpose. Chloe was no longer the young lawyer trying to make her mark in a competitive industry. She was a woman who had learned that her voice mattered, no, it needed to be heard. As she arrived at the courthouse, she was greeted by the familiar hum of legal proceedings. Lawyers and clients alike milled about, but today, Chloe's walk felt different. There was no hesitation in her step. She knew what she had to do, and she had prepared herself for every possible outcome. Whether Judge Finns acknowledged her case or not, she had already made her point. She had already stood up for herself. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Chloe's motion had created a stir, and she could feel the weight of it as she walked to her seat. Her opponents, representing the state, sat across from her, faces impassive. They were prepared to defend the judge's actions with every legal argument they could muster. But Chloe had something they didn't, a cause that resonated far beyond the confines of law. As the hearing began, Judge Finns entered the room, his face as stern as ever. The room grew quiet as he took his seat, and Chloe couldn't help but feel the intensity of his gaze. The same gaze that had scrutinized her so mercilessly weeks before. But now, the tables had turned. Chloe wasn't afraid. She had her evidence, her arguments, and her conviction. "Ms. Matthews," the judge began, his voice measured, "you have requested a review of my decision regarding your religious symbol in the courtroom. I've read your motion. I've considered the legal implications. Please, present your argument." Chloe stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. But there was no fear now. There was only clarity, purpose, and the steady rhythm of a woman who knew she was doing the right thing. She began to speak, her voice clear and strong, as she explained how her case was rooted not only in religious rights but in the broader issues of equality, fairness, and representation. "Your Honor," she began, "my wearing of the cross was not a mere act of defiance. It was an expression of my faith, my heritage, and my right as an individual to exist as I am. I understand that courtrooms must maintain order and respect. But I also understand that our nation was founded on the principle that all people are created equal, with the right to express themselves freely. Judge Finns, this case is not just about one woman's right to wear a religious symbol. It's about the right of every individual to be seen for who they are, without fear of judgment or discrimination. Chloe could feel the eyes of the courtroom on her as she spoke. It wasn't just the judge who was listening. The others, her colleagues, the attorneys, and even the court reporters, were hearing her words. She wasn't just making a legal argument. She was telling her truth. Religious symbols, like the cross I wear, do not represent division, Chloe continued, her voice steady but full of emotion. They represent connection. They represent my belief in love, in unity, and in the strength that comes from my faith. To ask me to remove that symbol is to ask me to erase a part of myself, something that no one, no judge, no law, has the right to do. There was a moment of silence as her words settled into the air. Chloe could feel the weight of them. For the first time, she felt like she had truly been seen. She wasn't just a lawyer presenting a case, she was a woman standing tall, unapologetic, and fully aware of the power of her identity. Judge Finn's expression remained impassive, but Chloe could sense a shift in the room. He didn't interrupt her, didn't dismiss her words as he had done before. Instead, he sat back, his eyes narrowing as he considered her argument. When the hearing concluded, there was no immediate decision. The judge needed time to deliberate. Chloe sat back down in her seat, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and hope. She had done what she came to do. She had made her case, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel less than, for everyone who had ever been told that their beliefs, their identities, their very existence didn't belong. The following week, Chloe received the ruling. Judge Finns had ruled in her favor. The courtroom erupted in quiet murmurs as the judge's decision was announced. Chloe's heart raced as she processed the words. The fine was overturned, and it was made clear that her right to wear a religious symbol in the courtroom was protected. It was a victory, not just for her, but for anyone who had ever fought to be seen and heard. As Chloe stood up, she felt a wave of relief and triumph wash over her. She had won the case, but more importantly, she had won something much deeper. She had reclaimed her power, her faith, and her identity. She had proven that no matter how intimidating the opposition, no matter how many barriers were placed before her, she would never back down from the fight for what was right. Outside the courthouse, Chloe took a deep breath, the weight of the victory settling over her like a warm embrace. The battle had been long, and at times, it had felt impossible. But in the end, Chloe had prevailed. And she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. Her journey had been one of self-discovery, resilience, and unwavering conviction. And no matter what came next, Chloe Matthews was ready for it. Chloe left the courthouse with a feeling of quiet triumph, but she knew that victory wasn't the end of her journey. The case had changed her, reshaped her understanding of the world and her place in it. She had stood up to power, to a system that often seemed impenetrable, and had come out victorious. But there was still work to be done. She had proven that a single voice could make a difference, but now she had to find ways to ensure that her fight wasn't just a one-time stand, it had to spark a movement. A change. As the weeks passed, Chloe's reputation grew. The case against Judge Finns had garnered attention, and she was invited to speak at conferences, at forums on religious rights, and even at her law school alma mater. The legal community was buzzing, and many began to see her not just as a skilled lawyer, but as a leader. Chloe was quickly becoming a symbol of resilience, and people reached out to her from all over the country, sharing their stories of discrimination and injustice. She had become a beacon for those who felt voiceless, and it was both humbling and overwhelming. One evening, as Chloe sat at her desk, reviewing emails from clients and reporters, her phone rang. It was Rachel. "Hey," Chloe answered, leaning back in her chair, the fatigue from the day settling in. "What's up?" I just wanted to check in on you, Rachel said with a light chuckle. I know you're probably drowning in requests and interviews right now, but I wanted to remind you to take a breath. Don't forget about you, okay? Chloe smiled. She was grateful for Rachel's constant reminder to stay grounded. I'm doing all right, just busy. It feels like I'm living in a whirlwind right now. But I can't help but feel like something bigger is coming from all this. I mean, the victory was great, but it feels like it's just the beginning of something much larger than me. Rachel paused before replying, that's because it is. You've already started something, Chloe. You've given people the courage to speak up. You've shown them that one person really can make a change. And now? Now is your chance to take it even further. Chloe's thoughts turned inward. The weight of the responsibility she felt was palpable. She had fought for herself, yes, but what about those who weren't in a position to fight? What about the people who needed someone to stand for them? She couldn't be the only one carrying the weight of this cause. It was time to reach out, to make sure others had the tools and the confidence to stand up too. After hanging up with Rachel, Chloe knew what she needed to do. She spent the next few days laying out plans for a legal advocacy program, one that would offer resources and support to individuals who face discrimination in the workplace, in courtrooms, and beyond. She didn't want to just be a lawyer who fought cases, she wanted to be part of a movement that pushed for systemic change, that created lasting ripples throughout society. The program, which she would call Voices for Justice, would be a non-profit organization offering pro bono legal services, educational workshops, and community support to those in marginalized groups who were facing discrimination. It would also act as a platform for those whose voices often went unheard, helping them navigate legal battles they might not have had the resources or knowledge to fight on their own. As Chloe took the first steps toward making Voices for Justice a reality, the support she received was overwhelming. Colleagues from her firm volunteered their time, former law professors offered to help design educational content, and even clients who had benefited from her legal expertise reached out, wanting to contribute. This wasn't just a legal project, it was a collective effort, and Chloe realized she was not alone in her desire to make the world a better place. The first public event for Voices for Justice was held in a small community center downtown. Chloe stood at the front, surrounded by a group of volunteers, activists, and lawyers, all of whom shared her vision. The event was aimed at educating the community about their rights and offering legal support to those who had been wronged. It was small, but Chloe could already feel the impact it was having. This is just the beginning, Chloe said, addressing the crowd. Together, we are building something that will allow every person, regardless of their background, to know that their voice matters. No one should have to face discrimination in silence. And no one should have to fight alone. The crowd cheered, and Chloe's heart swelled with pride. She had made the leap from being just one person fighting for her own rights to leading a movement that would amplify the voices of many others. She had turned her personal battle into something far greater than herself. In the weeks that followed, the organization gained traction. Voices for Justice became a recognized name in legal circles, and Chloe was invited to speak at universities, workplaces, and conferences around the country. She became a figurehead for social justice in the legal field, speaking out not just for the right to religious expression, but for the right to exist without fear, without prejudice. But it wasn't always easy. As the organization grew, so did the pressure. There were sleepless nights, moments of self-doubt, and times when Chloe wondered if she was doing enough. But each time the weight of it all felt too much, she reminded herself of the journey she had taken. She had been through the fire and come out stronger on the other side. She had proven to herself and to others that change was possible. And with that thought, she found the strength to keep going. As Voices for Justice continued to grow, Chloe also learned how to balance her professional responsibilities with her personal life. She made sure to spend time with her friends, with Rachel, and with her mother, who had been there for her every step of the way. She wasn't going to let her newfound purpose consume her completely. She had learned the importance of self-care and of appreciating the people who had supported her along the way. One evening, As Chloe sat on her balcony overlooking the city, she thought back to that day in the courtroom, the day when her world had felt like it was crashing down around her. Now, as she watched the sun set over the horizon, she couldn't help but feel a profound sense of peace. She had come so far. And though the journey wasn't over, she knew that the future was bright. Her fight had started as a personal battle for her right to be herself, but it had grown into something much more powerful. Chloe Matthews had found her voice, and in doing so, she had given others the courage to find theirs as well. And together, they were changing the world, one case, one voice, and one act of courage at a time. The success of Voices for Justice spread like wildfire. As Chloe continued to speak at various events, the organization gained a loyal following of both supporters and those seeking legal assistance. It wasn't long before she found herself in the middle of an even bigger case, one that could set a new legal precedent for workplace discrimination. This time, it wasn't just about religious expression, but about the intersectionality of race, gender, and faith. A woman named Amara Johnson had reached out to Chloe. Amara was a black Muslim woman who had been fired from her job at a well-known tech company after her employer discovered that she wore a hijab. The company, citing professionalism and company culture, claimed that Amara's hijab violated the dress code and made her clients uncomfortable. Despite her impeccable performance record and numerous efforts to resolve the situation internally, Amara was left without a job and without answers. Amara's case felt like a punch to Chloe's gut. She saw herself in Amara's struggle, understood the deep pain of being judged for something so personal. But Chloe knew that Amara's story could be the key to shifting not just workplace policies but societal attitudes toward faith and identity in professional spaces. If they could win this case, it would send a powerful message to employers across the country: you cannot fire someone because of who they are. Chloe immediately took on the case, bringing in her team of volunteers from Voices for Justice. They dug into Amara's background, combing through employment records, legal precedents, and company documents. The more they investigated, the more blatant the discrimination seemed. It wasn't just the hijab. Amara had been excluded from meetings, given less important projects, and even told by her manager that her appearance was distracting. Chloe felt a deep anger rise within her, a fire that fueled her every move. In preparation for the lawsuit, Chloe held several strategy meetings with her team. The case was going to be difficult. Amara's employer was a powerhouse in the tech industry, and they had deep pockets to fight back. But Chloe was determined. This wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a chance to redefine what inclusion meant in the modern workplace. She knew that if they lost, it would set a dangerous precedent for religious discrimination. If they won, it could open the doors for a more inclusive, accepting future for everyone. As the case progressed, the media took notice. Amara became the face of a broader issue, and Chloe's involvement solidified her position as one of the leading voices in the fight for workplace equality. Reporters, bloggers, and activists from around the world reached out to Chloe, wanting to hear her thoughts on the case. The pressure mounted, but Chloe was steadfast. She knew the weight of the moment. This was about more than just Amara, this was about every person who had ever been forced to choose between their career and their identity. The day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was packed. The tension was palpable. Chloe stood before the judge, her argument prepared, her mind sharp. The opposition, a well-dressed team of corporate lawyers, smirked as they entered the room, clearly confident that their wealth and status would be enough to win the case. But Chloe wasn't intimidated. She had faced giants before, and this time, she was even more resolute. The proceedings began, and Chloe made her opening statement. "Your Honor, today we stand before you not just on behalf of Amara Johnson, but for every person who has ever been told that their identity is a barrier to their success," Chloe began. "Amara's faith, her identity, her heritage, these are not impediments. They are what make her who she is. And what makes her an extraordinary employee. To fire her because she wears a hijab is not only a violation of her rights, it's a stain on the very idea of what it means to have an equal opportunity in the workplace." Her words reverberated through the courtroom. Chloe could feel the energy shift, could see the judge's brow furrow as he considered the weight of her argument. The defense attempted to counter with their usual claims of company culture and client concerns, but Chloe was prepared. She had gathered testimonials from former employees who spoke of the company's history of overlooking religious and racial biases. She had statistical data showing how diverse workforces outperformed their homogeneous counterparts. She even presented an expert witness who explained the impact of workplace discrimination on mental health and job satisfaction. The final blow came when Chloe called Amara to the stand. The young woman, visibly nervous but determined, took her place in front of the judge. "Amara," Chloe said gently, "could you please tell the court what happened the day you were fired?" Amara's voice shook at first, but as she spoke, her words grew stronger, clearer. "I had worked for the company for over 2 years," Amara began. "My performance was always praised. I had received awards for my work. But when I wore my hijab to the office one day, things changed. It wasn't immediate, but gradually, I felt the shift. My colleagues stopped talking to me. My manager asked me to tone down my appearance. Eventually, I was told that the company was going in a new direction, and that I no longer fit the culture." Tears welled in Chloe's eyes as Amara finished speaking. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. She had seen so many people in similar situations, forced to hide parts of themselves to succeed. But this wasn't just a case of workplace misconduct. This was personal. Amara was standing up not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told to choose between their faith and their career. As the trial drew to a close, Chloe knew the outcome was uncertain. The corporate world was a powerful opponent, and the law was often slow to evolve. But she felt a quiet confidence. They had made their case. And no matter what happened, they had already won. A week later, the ruling came down. Amara Johnson was awarded compensation for wrongful termination, and the company was ordered to revise its workplace policies to prevent discrimination based on religion and appearance. It wasn't just a victory for Amara, it was a victory for every person who had ever felt pressured to conform. The ruling sent shockwaves through the industry, forcing companies to take a hard look at their practices. Chloe knew that the ripple effect of this case would be felt for years to come. As Chloe sat in her office, reflecting on the case, she realized something important. The victory wasn't just about the courtroom. It was about the power of each person who found the courage to speak out, to stand up for what was right. Voices for justice had grown far beyond her own fight. It was now a movement that was changing the very fabric of society. Chloe had been the spark, but it was the people who followed her, who believed in the cause, who would continue the work. Together, they were rewriting the narrative of what it meant to be truly free, to be truly accepted. And for Chloe, that was the greatest victory of all. Chloe had grown accustomed to the limelight. The media, once a source of anxiety, now felt like an extension of her mission. She used her platform to speak out about the issues that mattered to her, from workplace equality to civil rights, from faith-based discrimination to personal empowerment. But beneath the spotlight, the challenges were far from over. The pressure of constant visibility, the ceaseless demands of her nonprofit, and the never-ending cases, each one bringing new complexities and struggles, began to weigh heavily on her. Late one night, after a long day of back-to-back meetings and interviews, Chloe found herself sitting alone in her office, the only sound the hum of the fluorescent lights above. Her desk was cluttered with papers, case files, reports, emails she hadn't yet answered. She picked up a letter that had been sitting on her desk for days. It was from a law school colleague she hadn't heard from in years, someone who had been a mentor to her in the early days of her career. The letter was brief, but the words jumped off the page. "Chloe, I know what you're doing is important, but you have to take care of yourself. The weight of it all will break you if you don't find balance. Don't let your fight for others consume you entirely." The words hit Chloe like a wave. She had heard it from Rachel and others, but hearing it from someone she respected so deeply felt different. She had been so focused on the work, on the movement, on the next case, that she had forgotten to care for herself. The relentless pursuit of justice had become both her purpose and her burden. In that moment, Chloe realized that she couldn't do it all alone. She had built something powerful, but the foundation of voices for justice was fragile. Without a solid support system, the very movement she was fighting for might fall apart under its own weight. It was time to delegate, to ask for help, and to find a way to protect her own well-being. The next morning, Chloe called a meeting with her team. She had been running herself ragged, taking on every case, every interview, every fundraiser. But it was clear now that the organization needed more structure, more leadership. She needed to build a team that could carry the load with her. Sitting around the conference table were her core group of lawyers, activists, and volunteers. There was Rachel, who had been her sounding board since the beginning, and other key members of the organization who were just as passionate about the cause as she was. Chloe felt a sense of gratitude toward them all, but also a deep recognition that she couldn't continue at this pace. It was time to involve others at a deeper level. "I've been thinking a lot about our future," Chloe began, her voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. "What we've built is incredible, and I'm proud of all of you for the hard work you've put into Voices for Justice. But I've also realized that we need more than just volunteers and lawyers. We need leaders. We need to build a system where I'm not carrying the entire weight of this organization on my shoulders." Rachel spoke up first, her tone both concerned and supportive. "Chloe, we're all in this together. You've been a rock for this organization, but we know how hard you've been pushing yourself. We can all help more. Let's structure the organization in a way that makes sense for growth, so it doesn't all fall on you." Chloe nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders just by hearing Rachel's words. She wasn't alone. It was a simple truth, but one she had forgotten in the rush of deadlines and public appearances. "I want to create a leadership council," Chloe continued, "people who will take on roles in key areas, legal support, fundraising, community outreach. We'll split responsibilities, so no one person has to do it all. And we'll bring in new people who share our mission, so we can grow sustainably." The team was immediately on board. Chloe had always known they were capable, but this moment of vulnerability reminded her that leadership didn't mean doing everything on your own. It meant empowering others to step up, to share the load, and to be part of the larger vision. As the meeting ended, Chloe felt a deep sense of relief. It wasn't the kind of victory she was used to, there were no headlines, no media coverage. But it was an important step forward. She had built something meaningful, and now it was time to trust others to carry the work. In the weeks that followed, Chloe worked closely with her team to reorganize Voices for Justice. They brought in new board members with experience in nonprofit management, marketing, and financial planning. They developed a clear strategic plan that included not only legal support but also educational initiatives and advocacy campaigns. Chloe was able to step back from the day-to-day grind and focus on the larger picture, the mission, the people, and the future. But as Chloe took a step back from the front lines, something unexpected happened. The pressure she had been under for so long began to take its toll on her personal life. She hadn't realized how much time she had neglected her relationships, how much she had distanced herself from her friends, from Rachel, and even from her mother, who had always been there to support her. One evening, Chloe decided to visit her mother's house for the first time in weeks. She'd been so wrapped up in work that she had failed to notice the emptiness in her life outside of Voices for Justice. Her mother, Mary, greeted her with a warm hug, her smile the same as ever. But there was something in Mary's eyes, something that told Chloe her absence hadn't gone unnoticed. "Mom," Chloe said, sitting down at the kitchen table, "I've been so caught up in everything. I haven't been here. I'm sorry." Mary didn't say anything at first, just placed a plate of cookies in front of her daughter. Chloe had always loved her mother's homemade cookies, they were a symbol of comfort, of home. "I understand, sweetheart," Mary finally said, her voice gentle. "But don't forget about the people who love you. They're not just part of your past, they're part of your future too." Chloe felt the weight of her mother's words, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to relax. To breathe. The fight for justice wasn't just about winning cases or making headlines. It was about the people who stood by her, who supported her through the toughest of times. She couldn't keep pouring herself into the work if she didn't take the time to nurture the relationships that mattered most. As she left her mother's house that night, Chloe promised herself she would make more time for the things that grounded her, her family, her friends, and her own well-being. She didn't have to sacrifice one for the other. There was room for both. The battle for justice would continue. But Chloe had learned an important lesson. It wasn't just about changing the world, it was about staying connected to the people who mattered most. And with that balance, she knew she could do it all. Chloe had always believed that every case she took on had the potential to change the world, but the one that was about to land on her desk would push her beliefs, her strength, and her resilience to an entirely new level. It came through a call late one evening, the kind of call Chloe had grown used to, urgent, filled with the weight of injustice. But this time, it was different. "Chloe, you need to hear this," said the voice on the other end of the line. It was Sarah, the head of their legal division. "It's a case you won't want to miss. Trust me." The story Sarah was about to tell her sounded like something out of a legal drama, too outrageous to be true, but Chloe had learned over the years that truth was often stranger than fiction. A major pharmaceutical company, which had been a sponsor of Voices for Justice, was being accused of systematically covering up a dangerous drug's side effects. The drug, marketed as a miracle cure for a variety of chronic illnesses, was causing severe health complications for thousands of people. The company's executives had known about the risks for years but continued to push the drug onto the market, disregarding the safety of patients in exchange for profit. What made this case different, however, was the woman who had stepped forward. Her name was Lauren Price. A former scientist employed by the company, Lauren had discovered the truth behind the drug's dangerous side effects and had tried to warn her colleagues. But instead of being hailed as a hero, Lauren had been fired, her career destroyed, and her credibility tarnished. The company's executives had gone to extreme lengths to discredit her, even going so far as to accuse her of tampering with research data. Lauren, now in hiding, had reached out to Chloe's organization, and Sarah had already started reviewing the case. It was a long shot. Lauren had no legal backing, no financial resources to fund a lawsuit. But Chloe knew one thing: this was exactly the kind of case Voices for Justice was built to take on. They weren't just fighting for the voiceless, they were fighting for the truth. Chloe didn't hesitate. She agreed to take on the case, not just because it was important, but because it felt personal. She'd seen the damage that corporate greed could do to people's lives, especially when those in power had no regard for the consequences of their actions. The first step was to meet with Lauren. Chloe arranged for a safe, discreet meeting at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. As Chloe entered, she saw a woman sitting at a corner table, her face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat and large sunglasses. Her posture was tense, like someone who had spent too much time looking over their shoulder. "Lauren?" Chloe asked softly, approaching the table. The woman looked up, her face etched with years of anxiety, but there was a spark in her eyes, determination, even in the face of everything she had lost. "I'm Chloe," she said, offering her hand. "I'm here to help." Lauren hesitated for a moment but then reached out and shook her hand. Her grip was firm, betraying none of the fear that had kept her in hiding for months. "I'm glad you came," Lauren said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trying to find someone who will listen, someone who will take this seriously." Chloe sat down across from her, her mind already racing with questions. She had read through the preliminary reports, but meeting Lauren in person brought the case to life in a way that no document could. Lauren's story was one of both brilliance and betrayal. She had spent years working for the pharmaceutical company, rising through the ranks due to her exceptional research skills. She had been the one to identify the dangerous side effects of the drug before it even hit the market. But when she raised concerns, she was dismissed, her warnings ignored. As she dug deeper, she uncovered internal memos, emails, and meetings that proved the company had known about the risks but had continued to push the drug, manipulating test results and even using patients as guinea pigs to get approval from regulatory bodies. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Lauren had no one to turn to. The company's legal team had threatened her with lawsuits for defamation, and any attempt to go public had been met with aggressive legal action. Her life had been upended, and now she was a whistleblower with no protection. Chloe listened carefully, her heart heavy with the weight of the injustice Lauren had suffered. This was not just a corporate misconduct case, it was a case of betrayal, of a system designed to silence the voices of those who dared to expose the truth. "I don't know what to do anymore," Lauren admitted, her voice trembling. "They've ruined me. I've lost my career, my reputation. I've been threatened, and I don't even feel safe anymore." Chloe leaned forward, her resolve hardening. "You're not alone anymore. We'll fight this. Voices for Justice is going to take this case all the way." Lauren's eyes flickered with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "You really think we can win?" "I don't just think we can win," Chloe said firmly. "I know we can." The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings, document reviews, and strategy sessions. Chloe assembled her team, bringing in some of the top lawyers and experts in pharmaceutical law, whistleblower protection, and public health. The more they dug, the clearer it became, the pharmaceutical company had been running a massive cover-up operation. This wasn't just about a single faulty drug, this was about a culture of corruption that had permeated the entire company. Chloe knew they were up against a formidable adversary. The company had resources, powerful allies, and a public image to protect. But this wasn't just a case, it was a crusade for the truth. They were going to expose the corruption, no matter the cost. The media quickly caught wind of the case, and soon, Voices for Justice was at the center of a national controversy. The pharmaceutical company denied all allegations, calling the claims baseless and slanderous. But Chloe had something they didn't, the truth, and a relentless will to see it through. As the case gained momentum, Chloe's personal life began to take a backseat once again. But this time, it didn't bother her. She had a cause that was bigger than herself, bigger than anything she had ever fought for before. And she wasn't backing down. But Chloe soon realized that this case would not only test her legal abilities but also her belief in the justice system itself. The pressure of facing a giant, of going up against a corporation with nearly endless resources, was beginning to take its toll. Would they win? Would the truth prevail? The courtroom drama was just beginning, and Chloe was ready to face it head-on. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that has inspired you to fight for justice, even when the odds seem impossible? As Chloe sat in her office, staring at the mounting pile of evidence, the reality of the case began to settle in. She had faced tough battles before, but this was unlike anything she had ever encountered. This was bigger than just winning or losing, it was about exposing a vast network of corruption that had the power to shake the foundations of the entire pharmaceutical industry. And the weight of that responsibility rested heavily on her shoulders. Lauren's case wasn't just a legal challenge, it was a moral one. Every document Chloe reviewed, every witness statement she read, only deepened her resolve. The pharmaceutical company had known for years about the risks their drug posed to the public, and yet they continued to push it onto the market, hiding the truth from doctors and patients alike. Lauren's courage in coming forward was a beacon of hope for those who had suffered in silence, and Chloe knew she had to see this through. But the road to the courtroom was long, and it wasn't just about gathering evidence, it was about making a case that could stand up to the immense power of the corporation's legal team. Chloe spent late nights strategizing with her team, poring over depositions, cross-referencing internal emails, and preparing for the moment when they would step into that courtroom and fight for justice. And all the while, the media storm surrounding the case continued to grow. Headlines like, "Whistleblower exposes corruption in Big Pharma," "The truth behind the miracle drug," and "Voices for Justice takes on Big Pharma, will they win?" flashed across news outlets, social media feeds, and television screens. Chloe knew this was her moment, Voices for Justice was now a household name. But with that recognition came an overwhelming pressure. She had to deliver. As the weeks passed, Chloe found herself juggling the demands of the case with the ongoing work of running Voices for Justice. The legal department was stretched thin, with cases piling up as the organization's notoriety grew. She knew she couldn't keep up this pace forever. But there was no turning back now. She had to keep pushing forward, not just for Lauren and the thousands of others who had been harmed by the drug, but for the integrity of the organization she had built. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Chloe found herself in the office of her trusted assistant, Rachel. The room was quiet, save for the soft click of a keyboard as Rachel typed away at her computer. Chloe walked in and sank into the chair across from her, the weight of the day settling in her bones. "Hey," Chloe said softly, her voice tired. "How's everything going with the case prep?" Rachel looked up, concern flickering in her eyes. "We're on track. The witnesses are prepped, the expert testimonies are lined up, and the media campaign is helping us keep the pressure on. But I can see you're burning out. Are you sure you're okay?" Chloe rubbed her temples, trying to ease the headache that had been building for hours. "I'm fine," she replied, though even she knew she wasn't. The exhaustion was starting to take its toll, but she couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now, not when so much was at stake. Rachel didn't press her further, but Chloe could see the concern in her eyes. Rachel had been her right hand for years, and she had been there through every high and every low. She knew Chloe better than anyone. "I'll be okay," Chloe said, forcing a smile. "We're so close, Rachel. This case, it's not just about Lauren. It's about every person who's been lied to. Every person who's suffered because of corporate greed." "I know," Rachel replied, her voice firm. "And we're going to win. You've got this." Chloe nodded, grateful for Rachel's unwavering support. But deep down, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the worst was yet to come. The closer they got to the trial, the more dangerous the fight became. The pharmaceutical company wasn't going to roll over. They would do everything in their power to discredit Lauren, to discredit Voices for Justice, to protect their bottom line. The day of the trial arrived with a heavy sense of anticipation. The courtroom was filled with reporters, lawyers, and spectators, all eager to witness the unfolding drama. Chloe stood at the front of the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She had prepared for this moment for months, but standing here, facing the giant that was the pharmaceutical company, felt different. It was no longer just about a case, it was about something far greater, accountability. Lauren sat in the witness stand, her face pale but resolute. Chloe had spoken to her the night before, reassuring her that she was not alone in this fight. It was one of those rare moments when Chloe saw the full weight of what was at stake, the potential to right an immense wrong, to bring justice to those who had suffered. It wasn't just about winning, it was about the truth. As the trial began, Chloe's team presented the evidence they had painstakingly gathered. Internal emails were shown, revealing that the company had known about the drug's dangerous side effects but had actively suppressed the information. Expert witnesses testified about the long-term health consequences of the drug, while the company's legal team scrambled to refute the claims, attacking Lauren's credibility and her motives. It wasn't easy. Chloe had expected the fight to be tough, but the company's lawyers were ruthless. They portrayed Lauren as a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind, attempting to paint her as someone who had exaggerated the drug's dangers in an attempt to get revenge. They tried to discredit every piece of evidence that Chloe's team introduced, from Lauren's initial reports to the expert testimonies that supported her claims. But Chloe held her ground. She remained calm, focused, and unwavering in her belief that the truth would prevail. She cross-examined the defense witnesses with precision, pointing out the inconsistencies in their testimony and the gaps in their arguments. It was a battle of wits and strategy, and Chloe was more than prepared. The turning point came when one of the company's own former executives, a whistleblower who had come forward, agreed to testify. He revealed that the company had conducted multiple internal studies that confirmed the dangers of the drug, but they had intentionally kept the information hidden in order to protect their profits. The testimony was a bombshell, one that shifted the momentum of the trial in Chloe's favor. As the trial continued, Chloe's confidence grew. She could feel the tide turning in their favor. The truth was coming to light, and no amount of legal maneuvering could stop it. But even as the case moved closer to a verdict, Chloe knew that this battle was far from over. The pharmaceutical company had deep pockets, and they would stop at nothing to protect their interests. But one thing was certain, Voices for Justice was not backing down. The journey was long, and the stakes were higher than ever, but Chloe knew they were on the right side of history. The road to justice might be paved with obstacles, but she was ready to face whatever came next. The courtroom was quiet except for the sound of papers shuffling and the occasional cough from the spectators. Chloe sat at the defense table, her eyes locked on the judge, trying to gauge his reactions to every word, every piece of evidence being presented. The trial had entered its second week, and the pressure was starting to mount. The defense had pulled out every trick in the book, trying to tarnish Lauren's credibility, trying to paint her as nothing more than a disgruntled former employee with a vendetta. But Chloe could feel the shift, each small victory, each piece of damning evidence that had been introduced, had begun to weigh on the pharmaceutical giant. The whistleblower testimony had been the turning point, but Chloe knew it wouldn't be enough to secure a victory without solid, irrefutable proof. They still had to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the pharmaceutical company had knowingly endangered the lives of thousands in exchange for profit. The defense was relentless, arguing that Lauren's accusations were exaggerated. They tried to discredit every study Chloe's team presented, questioning the methodology and the timing of the revelations. But Chloe stood firm, cross-examining each witness with precision, pushing through their attempts to sow doubt. Outside the courtroom, however, the battle was just as fierce. The media was in a frenzy, covering every twist and turn of the trial, but Chloe knew that the real war was being fought in the quiet moments when no one was watching. Behind closed doors, the pharmaceutical company was working overtime to sway public opinion, pulling strings to influence key figures, to discredit Voices for Justice at every turn. Chloe had expected this. She had known from the start that this was never going to be just a legal battle, it was a war of perception. The corporation's PR team had launched a full-scale media campaign, pushing the narrative that the case was a baseless attack on a company that had been a leader in the pharmaceutical industry for decades. They painted Lauren as a disgruntled ex-employee, someone who had been fired for unethical conduct and was now seeking revenge. The media echoed these claims, giving airtime to industry experts who questioned the validity of Lauren's accusations. But Chloe wasn't intimidated. She knew the truth, and she had the evidence to prove it. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day in court, Chloe walked out into the lobby of the courthouse, where a few of her colleagues from Voices for Justice were gathered. She could see the exhaustion on their faces, late nights, long hours, and an unrelenting media spotlight had taken their toll. Rachel approached her with a cup of coffee in hand. "You're holding up okay?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "I'm fine," Chloe replied, taking the coffee gratefully. "We've got this. The evidence is solid. We just need to keep pushing." Rachel hesitated. "I know you're focused, but I'm worried about you. You've been going non-stop for weeks now. Are you sure you're not burning out?" Chloe forced a smile. "I'm fine. We're so close, Rachel. I can feel it. We've got them on the ropes." Rachel didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. Instead, she glanced over Chloe's shoulder, her gaze lingering on something, or someone, across the room. Chloe turned to follow her gaze and saw a figure standing near the courthouse entrance, a familiar face in the crowd. It was Judge Finns. His expression was unreadable as he watched the scene unfold, his eyes briefly meeting Chloe's. There was no warmth in his gaze, no recognition, just the cold, calculating look of a man who knew the stakes of what was happening in his courtroom. For a brief moment, Chloe felt the weight of his gaze, and a small shiver ran down her spine. She knew the power Judge Finns held over this case. He had been appointed to the bench because of his reputation for being tough and impartial. But Chloe wasn't sure whether she could trust him. The way he had treated Lauren when they first crossed paths, when he had dismissed her case so easily, still lingered in her mind. "He's watching us," Rachel said softly, as if reading Chloe's thoughts. "I don't trust him, Chloe." "I don't either," Chloe murmured, her gaze still fixed on the judge. "But he doesn't get to decide this case based on what he wants to happen. He has to base his decision on the facts. And the facts are on our side." Still, the weight of the judge's presence in the courtroom felt like a shadow hanging over Chloe. She knew that it wasn't just the company's lawyers she had to worry about, it was the subtle influence of powerful figures like Judge Finns that could tip the scales in their favor. If he sided with the pharmaceutical company, if he allowed their tactics to go unchecked, it could derail everything. But Chloe wasn't ready to give up, not when the truth was so clear. As the days passed, Chloe's anxiety grew. Each day in court felt like a battle, and each small victory was countered by a fresh obstacle. But she had learned something over the years: sometimes, the greatest threats came from the most unexpected places. And in this case, Judge Finns was becoming a silent adversary in the background. Late one night, as Chloe sat alone in her office, she found herself revisiting the case files one last time. The evidence was strong, but something kept nagging at her. She pulled up the email chain again, the one that had been discovered during the whistleblower testimony. It was the thread that contained the smoking gun, the evidence that showed the company had been aware of the risks but had deliberately withheld the information from the public. As Chloe read through the email again, a cold realization washed over her. There was something in the chain, something she hadn't noticed before. A name. A name that appeared in the correspondence that didn't seem to fit. Judge Finns. The judge's name appeared in a thread discussing legal strategies for how to handle the negative press surrounding the drug. It was a subtle mention, buried among dozens of other names, but it was enough to make Chloe's heart race. Could the judge be compromised? Was he more involved in the cover-up than anyone had realized? Chloe's mind was spinning. If Judge Finns had ties to the pharmaceutical company, it would explain a lot: his dismissal of Lauren's case, his cold demeanor toward her, and the way he had allowed the defense to dominate in the early stages of the trial. But Chloe knew one thing: she couldn't let this go unnoticed. She had to investigate, had to find out if Judge Finns was as impartial as he claimed. If he wasn't, it would be up to her to expose him, no matter the consequences. The road ahead was even more treacherous than she had imagined. She wasn't just fighting the pharmaceutical company anymore, she was fighting a system that had been corrupted at its very core. But Chloe was ready. She wouldn't back down. She couldn't. Chloe's mind raced as she stared at the email chain. The name, Judge Finns, was clearly listed in the correspondence, a detail that had previously escaped her notice. It was as if the very foundation of everything she had been working for was now shaking beneath her. Could it really be true? Could the man who was supposed to be impartial, upholding the law, be part of the very system she was fighting to expose? The thought made her feel sick to her stomach. She had known from the start that this case wasn't going to be easy, but she had never expected this level of deception. If Judge Finns had ties to the pharmaceutical company, it would explain why he had been so dismissive of Lauren's case early on. It would also explain his cold, almost disdainful attitude toward Chloe during the trial. He wasn't just a neutral observer, he had a stake in the outcome. Chloe leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving the screen. The implications of this discovery were enormous. If she could prove that Judge Finns was compromised, it would change the entire course of the trial. But how could she prove it? The evidence was circumstantial at best, and accusing a sitting judge of corruption without solid proof could lead to disastrous consequences, not just for her, but for Voices for Justice as a whole. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from Rachel. "Rachel, we need to talk. Urgent. Can you meet me tonight? The case is getting ugly." Chloe's heart skipped a beat. If Rachel was using the word ugly, things were more serious than she had realized. She quickly typed a response. Chloe, I'm on my way. Let's meet at the office in 30 minutes. She grabbed her coat and headed out the door, her mind still reeling from the discovery. She needed to get to the bottom of this, fast. The trial was moving forward, and every day that passed felt like a ticking clock. The pressure was suffocating, and Chloe could feel it closing in on her. As she walked into the office, Rachel was already waiting. Her face was pale, and her usually calm demeanor was gone. She looked every bit as stressed as Chloe felt. Chloe, Rachel began, her voice low, I don't know how to say this, but things are getting worse. The pharmaceutical company is playing dirty, really dirty. They've got people on the inside, and we've got no idea how deep it goes. Chloe frowned. What do you mean? What's happening? Rachel handed her a folder. You need to see this. Chloe flipped through the papers inside, her eyes scanning each page. It didn't take long for her to understand what Rachel was talking about. The pharmaceutical company had escalated their tactics. They were leaking false information about Voices for Justice to the press, painting the organization as a radical group with a hidden agenda. They were trying to destroy Chloe's credibility, making her out to be a vengeful lawyer with no regard for the truth. I knew they'd fight back, but this is next level, Chloe said, her voice tight with frustration. They're trying to smear everything we've worked for. Rachel nodded. And it's working. The media is starting to turn on us. There's talk of a scandal involving Voices for Justice. We're being labeled as anti-corporate extremists. Chloe clenched her fists. She had expected a media blitz, but this was different. This wasn't just about the trial anymore, it was about destroying everything she had built. We can't let them get away with this, Chloe said, her voice filled with determination. But I'm not sure what to do next. We've already got a whistleblower, the evidence is mounting. Rachel interrupted her. Chloe, there's something else. I've been digging into Judge Finn's, and I think you need to know. It's not just his name in the emails. It's who he's been meeting with outside the courtroom. Chloe froze. What do you mean? Rachel took a deep breath. There's a record of Finn's meeting with a top executive from the pharmaceutical company. Multiple times. They're not just talking strategy, they're talking about the case. This isn't coincidence. This is collusion. Chloe's stomach churned. She had suspected something, but hearing it confirmed sent a rush of blood to her head. The judge wasn't just a passive player in this trial, he was actively working against them. We need to expose him, Chloe said, her voice fierce. If we don't, this case is over before it even begins. Rachel nodded, but Chloe could see the hesitation in her eyes. How do we do that? We don't have solid proof. We can't just accuse a judge without something more concrete. Chloe looked at the documents Rachel had handed her, her mind working quickly. There had to be a way. She couldn't let a corrupt judge dictate the outcome of the case, not when they were so close to exposing the truth. They had the whistleblower testimony, the internal emails, and now this damning meeting record. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Chloe's thoughts raced. She needed to dig deeper. She needed to find someone who could corroborate the meetings between Judge Finn's and the pharmaceutical company. Someone who had seen them together. Someone who could testify to the backdoor deals that had been made. I know what we need to do, Chloe said, her voice firm. We're going to go after the source. We find out who saw them, who knows about these meetings, and we bring them forward. We get the truth out, and we expose Finn's for what he is. Rachel looked unsure. It's dangerous. If we go public with this, it could backfire. We could be putting Voices for Justice at risk. Chloe stood up, her resolve hardening. I know the risks. But if we don't take this chance, we lose everything. We can't let them get away with it. The weight of her words hung in the air. Chloe knew this was a turning point, not just in the trial, but in her entire career. If she exposed Judge Finn's, it would change everything. It would mean a full-scale investigation into the corruption that had infiltrated the legal system, and it would shatter the powerful corporate machine that had kept the truth hidden for so long. But it would also make her a target. It would make Voices for Justice a target. And if they weren't careful, it could all come crashing down around them. Yet Chloe was undeterred. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The next few days felt like a blur to Chloe. Every moment was consumed with trying to gather more evidence, digging deeper into the connections between Judge Finn's and the pharmaceutical company. The pressure was mounting, not just from the courtroom, but from all directions. The media was closing in on them, the pharmaceutical company was throwing everything it had at Voices for Justice, and now, the judge she had once hoped would be neutral was becoming her most dangerous adversary. But Chloe wasn't about to back down. She couldn't. Not after everything that was at stake. Rachel had managed to get a lead on one of the individuals who had attended the meetings with Judge Finn's, someone who had once worked for the pharmaceutical company and had witnessed the interactions between the judge and the top executives. It was a risky move, but Chloe was willing to take the chance. If they could get this person to testify, it would be a game changer. It could expose the corruption for everyone to see. Late one evening, Chloe met with the informant, a nervous man in his late 30s who went by the name of Carl. He had requested to meet in a secluded diner, away from prying eyes. As Chloe entered, she spotted Carl sitting in the far corner, his eyes darting around the room. He was clearly anxious, but Chloe couldn't blame him. The stakes were high for him too. Carl. Chloe approached cautiously, sitting down across from him. He nodded, his voice low. I didn't think it would come to this. I thought it was just about business. I didn't know they were willing to go this far. Chloe leaned in, her voice firm but gentle. Tell me what you know, Carl. We need the truth. Carl hesitated, wringing his hands together as though trying to control his nerves. I used to work for them, well, I still do, but I'm on my way out. I was in a few meetings with Judge Finn's. I didn't think anything of it at first, but after everything came out with Lauren, I started to put things together. The judge wasn't just meeting with the executives, he was giving them advice on how to handle the case. They were getting tips from him, insider information. It wasn't just casual. He was directly involved in the strategy. Chloe's heart raced. This was the break they had been waiting for. What kind of advice? Did he help them craft their legal strategy? Carl nodded slowly. It wasn't just legal. He was guiding them on how to control the narrative. How to deal with the media, how to handle witnesses, how to keep the focus away from the dangerous side effects of the drug. He knew exactly how to steer the case in their favor. Chloe could feel the anger building inside her. The very judge presiding over their case had been actively helping the opposition. This wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Did anyone else know about these meetings? Carl's face darkened. A few people, but no one wanted to speak out. It's dangerous, Chloe. They've got connections everywhere. I'm not even supposed to be talking to you right now. Chloe reached across the table and placed a hand on his. I understand the risks, Carl. But if we don't do this, they will keep getting away with it. Thousands of people will continue to suffer. You can be the one to make this right. Carl looked torn, his gaze flickering with uncertainty. Finally, he sighed and pulled out a folder from his bag. I've got copies of the meeting records. Emails, notes, everything I saw. But I'm trusting you with this, Chloe. If this goes public, well, I can't promise that I'll be safe. Chloe nodded, taking the folder carefully. You've done the right thing. We'll protect you. I promise. As Carl left, Chloe sat alone in the booth, staring at the folder in front of her. The weight of what she was holding in her hands felt almost unbearable. This was the evidence they needed, the smoking gun that could bring down the pharmaceutical company and expose Judge Finns for the fraud he was. But it wasn't just the judge that Chloe had to worry about now. The entire legal system was at risk. If they went public with this information, it could trigger a full-blown investigation, and Chloe knew that it would spark a firestorm. Her every move, every decision, would be scrutinized. But the stakes were too high to back down. She had made a promise to Lauren, to the whistleblowers, and to everyone who had suffered because of this drug. She wasn't going to stop now, not when they were so close to the truth. The next day, Chloe gathered her team at the office. They all looked exhausted, the pressure of the trial bearing down on them like an unrelenting storm. But Chloe knew this was the moment they had been waiting for. "Everyone, we have what we need," she said, standing in front of the team. She placed the folder on the table, her eyes scanning each of their faces. "This is it, the evidence that proves Judge Finns was directly involved with the pharmaceutical company. He's been feeding them information, advising them on how to manipulate the case from the inside." The room fell silent. Rachel was the first to speak, her voice filled with both awe and fear. "Chloe, this could change everything. But exposing this, do we have enough to make it stick? If we go after Finns, it could turn the whole case upside down." Chloe took a deep breath, her resolve unwavering. "We have to go public with this. It's the only way to make sure the truth comes out. We're not just fighting for Lauren anymore. We're fighting for everyone who's been affected by this drug. We can't let them get away with it." Rachel's expression was filled with concern. "And the judge? What if he finds out about this before we can go public?" "We'll be careful," Chloe replied. "We need to move quickly, but strategically. I'll handle the press, and we'll make sure the information is released to the right people at the right time." The room was filled with a tense, determined energy as Chloe's team began to work on their plan. The stakes had never been higher, but Chloe knew one thing for sure, they weren't backing down. Not now. The following hours were a blur of phone calls, strategy sessions, and last-minute preparations. As they worked, Chloe's mind was focused solely on the path ahead. She wasn't just up against a pharmaceutical giant anymore. She was up against a corrupt system that had allowed injustice to thrive for far too long. And Chloe wasn't about to let that stand. The morning of the press conference arrived, and Chloe was filled with a mix of anticipation and dread. The weight of what they were about to do hung heavily on her shoulders. The team had worked tirelessly to ensure every detail was perfect, every document corroborated, every witness lined up. The evidence they had was undeniable, but the reality of exposing a sitting judge, a powerful corporation, and the entire system of justice was overwhelming. The ripple effect would be felt far and wide. Chloe stood in front of the mirror in her office, straightening her jacket. She tried to focus, pushing aside the nagging doubts that crept into her mind. Was this the right move? The risks were enormous, not just for her career, but for everyone who had supported voices for justice. If this backfired, they could all lose everything. Her phone buzzed on the desk, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was Rachel. "Rachel, we're ready. I just spoke with the reporter. The press is in place. Are you sure about this?" Chloe stared at the message for a moment before replying. "Chloe, I have no choice. If we don't do this, we're letting them win." She set the phone down and took a deep breath, gathering the strength she would need to go through with it. This was the moment she had been building toward since the trial began, the moment where everything would either change or come crashing down around her. The press conference was held in a sleek, glass-walled conference room that overlooked the city. The media had been invited, the cameras were in place, and the reporters were ready. Chloe had never been the type to enjoy the spotlight, but today was different. She wasn't standing in front of them as a lawyer, she was standing as a representative of truth, ready to expose the injustice that had been hidden for far too long. She stood at the podium, flanked by Rachel and a few other members of her team. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steadied herself, knowing this was the only way to turn the tide in their favor. The room was quiet as Chloe adjusted the microphone. She looked out at the sea of cameras and reporters, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Thank you all for being here today," Chloe began, her voice calm but firm. "My name is Chloe Evans, and I'm here to speak on behalf of Voices for Justice. We are an organization that has always stood for the truth, even when it means standing up against the most powerful forces in our society. Today, I stand before you not just as a lawyer, but as someone who is determined to ensure that justice is served." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. Chloe knew this wasn't just a legal battle anymore, it was a battle for the truth, a battle that could change the lives of so many. As many of you know, we've been fighting a legal battle to hold a major pharmaceutical company accountable for the harm caused by one of their drugs. The company's actions have been reckless and dangerous, and countless lives have been affected. But what many of you may not know is that the very system meant to uphold the law has been compromised. Today, I am here to expose the truth. Chloe reached into her folder and pulled out several documents. The room remained silent, the tension palpable as she began to lay out the evidence before them. "We have uncovered emails, meeting records, and testimony that show Judge Albert Finns, the judge presiding over this case, was actively involved with the pharmaceutical company. He was not just a neutral party. He was providing them with insider information, advising them on how to manipulate the case, how to control the narrative, and how to suppress critical evidence. His actions were not only unethical, they were criminal." The reporters looked at one another in disbelief. Chloe could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but she didn't flinch. She knew that what she was saying was true, and the truth had to be heard. Judge Finns met with executives from the pharmaceutical company on multiple occasions. He was advising them on how to handle the media, how to silence witnesses, and how to ensure the trial would end in their favor. These meetings were not casual, they were strategic, and they were intentional. They were designed to pervert the course of justice. The room erupted in murmurs. Reporters scribbled down notes furiously, their cameras clicking away. Chloe felt the air shift in the room, the gravity of what she had just said settling in. "I know the implications of what I'm revealing today," Chloe continued. "This is not just an attack on a single judge or a single company. This is a call for accountability, for transparency, and for the protection of those who have been harmed. We cannot allow corruption to flourish within the system that is supposed to protect us. If we do not act now, more lives will be lost, more people will suffer, and justice will remain a far-off dream." Chloe looked directly at the reporters, her voice rising with conviction. "The time for silence is over. We will not stand idly by while the truth is buried. The people deserve justice. The victims of this drug deserve justice. And we will fight for them until the truth is known, no matter what it costs." There was a brief silence before the reporters began to shout out questions. The room became chaotic as Chloe answered questions, confirming the details of the evidence they had gathered and explaining the next steps in their legal battle. But amidst the frenzy, Chloe could feel a deep sense of relief. The truth was out. The fight had officially begun, and there was no turning back now. After the press conference ended, Chloe and Rachel walked out of the room together, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The weight of the moment still hung heavily in the air, but Chloe knew they had made the right decision. "It's done," Rachel said, her voice quiet. Chloe nodded. "It's just beginning." As they stepped out into the lobby, Chloe's phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, her stomach dropping as she saw the name, Judge Finns. She answered the call, her voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Judge Finns. How can I help you?" There was a long pause on the other end before the judge's voice finally came through. "Chloe Evans, you've made a grave mistake. You think you can take me down. You have no idea what you're up against." Chloe's heart raced, but she refused to back down. "I'm not afraid of you, Judge. The truth is out now. You can't hide anymore." The line went dead. Chloe stood there for a moment, the weight of the call sinking in. She knew that this was just the beginning. Judge Finns would not let this go easily, and neither would the pharmaceutical company. But Chloe was ready. She had exposed the corruption, and now she would fight with everything she had to see justice served. The days that followed the press conference were a whirlwind of media attention, legal maneuvering, and unexpected threats. Chloe's phone never stopped buzzing. News outlets were scrambling to report the latest developments, and she could already see the fallout from their explosive revelations about Judge Finns and his corrupt ties to the pharmaceutical company. Some were calling it the biggest legal scandal in decades. Others were questioning Chloe's credibility, calling her motivations into doubt. But no matter what the media said, Chloe couldn't afford to slow down. She had come too far. There was no turning back now. Her team worked tirelessly, trying to keep up with the rapid pace of events. The pressure was suffocating, but Chloe had learned to function under stress. Every morning, she awoke with the same singular goal in mind, to bring down the system of corruption that had protected people like Judge Finns and the pharmaceutical giants for far too long. One afternoon, Chloe was sitting in her office, reviewing a pile of new documents that had come in overnight. She was sifting through a set of court transcripts when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but she picked it up anyway. "Hello." Chloe's voice was sharp, weary from the intensity of the week. "Ms. Evans," a gravelly voice said on the other end. It was a voice she didn't recognize. "I have information about Judge Finns. If you want to take him down, you'll need more than what you've got." Chloe's heart skipped a beat. "Who is this?" "Let's just say I'm someone who knows where the bodies are buried," the voice replied. "I have what you need, but you'll need to meet me in person if you want to get it." Chloe sat up straight in her chair, her mind racing. "Where?" "Downtown. Tonight. 9 p.m. Don't bring anyone with you." Before she could respond, the line went dead. That evening, Chloe found herself standing outside an old, abandoned building near the heart of downtown. The area was eerily quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows along the cracked pavement. She had no idea who this person was or if they were trustworthy, but something told her that this meeting could be the key to bringing down Judge Finns once and for all. She checked her watch. It was nearly 9 p.m. Chloe wasn't afraid. She had faced much worse than a shadowy figure trying to offer her information. But even she had to admit that her gut was telling her that this could be a trap. Still, she pushed the thought aside. She was too close to stop now. She stepped forward cautiously, entering the dimly lit building. The air was thick with dust, and the sound of her footsteps echoed through the empty halls. She turned a corner and found a figure standing near the back, hidden in the shadows. "Ms. Evans," the man said, his voice low and thick with a southern drawl. He stepped forward into the light. He was tall, with graying hair and a weathered face, wearing a long coat. His eyes were hard, but there was something in them that told Chloe this man wasn't here to harm her. "Who are you?" she asked, trying to gauge whether she could trust him. "Name's Thomas. Thomas Hill. I used to be involved in the legal world," he replied. "But I walked away from it all when I saw how deep the corruption went." "Judge Finns? He's just the tip of the iceberg." Chloe's heart raced. "What do you know about him?" "I know that Finns has been laundering money through a series of shell companies. It's all tied to his dealings with the pharmaceutical company." "You think he's only been advising them?" "No. He's been getting paid. Big time." Thomas handed her a manila envelope, which Chloe took carefully. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside, she found a stack of documents, each more damning than the last: bank statements, wire transfers, and evidence of fraudulent payments to accounts linked to Judge Finns. "This is the smoking gun," Thomas said. "Finns has been using his position on the bench to funnel money to a network of shell companies that he controls. This is how he's been making millions off of the pharmaceutical company. All of the meetings, all the advice he gave them, he was paid for it, and paid handsomely. Chloe felt a cold knot form in her stomach as she looked over the documents. This was far worse than she had imagined. It wasn't just corruption, it was outright criminal activity. Judge Finns had been operating a network of bribery and illegal payments, all while pretending to uphold the law. "Why are you helping me?" Chloe asked, her voice guarded. "Because someone has to stop him," Thomas said. "And I'm done turning a blind eye to this mess. I might not be able to take him down on my own, but you've got the platform to do it. You've got the team, the public, and the proof. Now, it's just about putting it all together." Chloe nodded, her mind racing. This was the break they needed, the final piece of the puzzle. She was more determined than ever to make sure this went public. No more cover-ups. No more lies. "I'll make sure this gets out there," Chloe promised. As Chloe left the building, clutching the envelope filled with evidence, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an alert from her legal team. "Breaking news, Judge Albert Finn's under investigation for financial misconduct linked to pharmaceutical corporation." Chloe's heart skipped a beat. The investigation had already started. She hadn't expected it to move this quickly, but the media's reaction to the press conference and the new evidence she had just uncovered was already putting the pressure on the authorities. There was no turning back now. Judge Finns was on the defensive, and Chloe had the ammunition to take him down. But even with this victory, Chloe knew the fight wasn't over. The pharmaceutical company wouldn't go down without a fight. And she couldn't afford to get complacent. They would retaliate. But Chloe had come this far, and she wasn't about to let anyone stop her now. As Chloe walked toward her car, the evening air was chilly against her skin. She glanced at her phone once more, taking in the breaking news with a small sense of satisfaction. But it was short-lived. She knew that the battle ahead would be harder than anything she'd faced so far. The pharmaceutical company wasn't going to let her expose them without a fight. And as for Judge Finns, he would be coming for her, she was certain of that. But Chloe had learned one thing through all of this: she wasn't afraid anymore. The truth was her weapon, and she was ready to use it. Chloe sat at her desk, staring at the mountain of paperwork that had accumulated in front of her. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of her desk lamp, which reflected the exhaustion in her eyes. The battle had only just begun, but already, she could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. Since the press conference, the momentum had shifted, and Chloe was no longer just fighting against a corrupt judge and a corporation. She was now the target of an intense counterattack. The pharmaceutical company had launched a smear campaign, painting her as an opportunist looking to capitalize on the suffering of others. They had even gone so far as to question her qualifications, implying that she was not a credible lawyer and had fabricated the evidence she had presented. Chloe had expected this. She had known from the beginning that they would stop at nothing to protect themselves. What she hadn't anticipated, however, was how far they would go. Just that morning, Chloe had received an anonymous tip-off. Someone had hacked into her personal email and was leaking sensitive information about her past. Her childhood, her family's financial struggles, and even her early career mistakes had all been dug up and put into the public eye. Her reputation was on the line, and with every new revelation, the stakes got higher. Rachel had been there, sitting next to her in the office, when Chloe had received the news. Her friend had tried to reassure her, but Chloe couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness that had settled over her. "This is what they do, Chloe," Rachel had said, her voice steady but laced with concern. "They attack your character. They try to discredit you so that people won't listen to what you have to say. But you can't let them win." Chloe hadn't said anything in response. She wasn't sure if she could handle the growing pressure. The thought of losing everything she had worked for, her career, her credibility, and the lives of the people who had trusted her, felt like an overwhelming burden. But she knew she couldn't back down. She was too close to the truth now. And the truth was the only thing that mattered. That evening, as Chloe sat in the dim light of her office, trying to push through her mounting anxiety, her phone buzzed again. This time, It was a call from the legal team. Chloe answered immediately, her voice still edged with the exhaustion she was feeling. "Chloe, we've got a problem," Rachel's voice crackled through the line. "What happened?" Chloe asked, already bracing for bad news. "It's worse than we thought. The pharmaceutical company is filing a motion to dismiss the case. They're claiming that the evidence you presented is inadmissible. They're also trying to discredit your team and question your motives. If they succeed, this could all come crashing down." Chloe's chest tightened. She knew this was coming. Their opposition had always been ruthless, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. She had known the risks, but she hadn't anticipated this level of retaliation. "What do we do?" Chloe asked, her voice shaking with frustration. "We fight back," Rachel replied, her voice firm. "We need to gather more evidence. We need to keep pushing forward, even when they try to push us down." Chloe sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know how much longer I can do this. They're coming at us from all sides." Rachel's tone softened. "Chloe, I know this isn't easy, but remember why you're doing this. It's not just for you. It's for everyone who's been hurt by that company. It's for the victims who've been silenced for so long. We can't let them win." Chloe stared out the window, the weight of Rachel's words sinking in. Rachel was right. She couldn't give up now, not when they were so close to bringing the truth to light. "Okay," Chloe said finally, her voice resolute. "We fight back. We can't let them tear us down." The next few days were a blur of intense legal strategy sessions, research, and more sleepless nights. Chloe spent hours combing through new evidence, finding ways to strengthen their case. She knew that if they were going to survive this counterattack, they needed to stay ahead of the pharmaceutical company's lawyers. But the pressure was mounting. Every time she checked her phone or opened her inbox, there was another piece of bad news waiting for her. Leaked personal details. More attacks on her character. And now, the pharmaceutical company had launched a full-scale public relations campaign, using their influence to turn public opinion against her. She was no longer just fighting a legal battle, she was fighting a war for her reputation. One afternoon, as Chloe was heading to a meeting with the legal team, she received a message from an unknown number. The message was short, but it sent a chill down her spine. "They're coming for you. Be careful." Chloe's heart raced as she stared at the message. She immediately dialed Rachel's number, her mind racing with thoughts of what this could mean. "Rachel, I just got a text. It says, 'They're coming for you. Be careful.' I don't know who sent it, but it feels ominous." Rachel's voice was sharp with concern. "Chloe, I need you to stay cautious. There's been talk of threats from people connected to the pharmaceutical company. It's possible they'll try to intimidate you. Don't go anywhere alone. Keep your phone charged, and let me know if anything seems off." Chloe nodded, although she felt a sense of unease settle over her. The stakes were higher than ever. The pharmaceutical company wasn't just trying to discredit her, they were willing to do whatever it took to stop her. And she wasn't sure how far they would go. Later that evening, Chloe stood in her kitchen, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She had made it this far, but she knew the road ahead would only get more treacherous. The battle for justice was far from over, and she had to stay vigilant. But as she gazed out the window, her reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, a woman fighting not just for her career, but for her life. She thought about all the people who had supported her along the way. Her team, her friends, the victims who had trusted her to fight for them. And she thought about the people who had been silenced for far too long, the ones who had been harmed by the pharmaceutical company's actions. Chloe wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for all of them. And no matter what happened, she wasn't going to stop. Chloe couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this isolated. The weight of everything pressing on her shoulders, media scrutiny, legal battles, personal attacks, was becoming unbearable. Yet, as the day dragged on, she remained determined to see this through. She'd fought too long and too hard to let it slip away now. But the message she received that morning changed everything. It was a simple email. One she almost didn't open. The subject line read, "We need to talk." But the message inside was anything but casual. "Chloe, I know you're going through a lot right now, but I can't keep quiet any longer. I've seen the damage you're doing, and I need to warn you. The case you're trying to win isn't just against Judge Finns and the pharmaceutical company, it's against the system. And there are powerful people who don't want it exposed. Trust me, you don't want to make enemies of them. I've been trying to protect you, but I can't do it anymore. You're on your own." The email was signed, "A Friend." Chloe stared at the screen, trying to process what she had just read. The tone of the message was cryptic, the language vague enough to be unsettling. A cold shiver ran down her spine as she wondered who could have sent it. Who was trying to protect her? And, more importantly, why had they decided to cut ties now? Her first instinct was to trust no one. She'd learned that lesson well in the past few months. But something in the email felt too personal, too familiar. Someone who had been following the case closely, someone who knew her strategy. Chloe's heart sank as she realized the horrifying possibility. Could someone close to her be betraying her? The rest of the day passed in a blur. Chloe couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Her mind raced with possibilities, but she couldn't focus enough to land on anything concrete. As the evening approached, she decided to take a walk to clear her head. The city was alive, buzzing with the kind of energy that always made her feel just a little bit lighter, despite everything she was going through. But as she walked along the familiar streets, something felt different. The crowd seemed to part unnaturally around her, and she felt as though she were being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, but when she turned around, no one seemed to be following her. She quickened her pace, almost feeling like a prey animal trying to outrun something far more dangerous than she could comprehend. Back at her apartment, Chloe tried to put the email out of her mind, but it gnawed at her. She needed answers. The best way to get them was to go directly to the source. That evening, she reached out to Thomas Hill, the informant who had handed over the critical evidence about Judge Finns and the pharmaceutical company. His information had been invaluable, but now she needed to know more. She dialed his number, the tension in her chest rising as the phone rang. "Hello." His voice was calm, but Chloe could tell something was off. "Thomas, it's Chloe. I need to talk to you. There's something going on, and I can't figure out who to trust." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Thomas spoke again, his voice was lower, more serious. "Chloe, you need to be careful. I've heard whispers. People are talking. And the ones you think are on your side? They might not be." Chloe's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Are you saying someone's working against me?" Thomas didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with urgency. "I can't say too much. But trust your instincts. Don't trust anyone who's been too close to you. And whatever you do, don't go to the press with anything more just yet. They've got eyes everywhere." The line clicked, and the call ended abruptly. Chloe sat frozen in her chair, her mind racing. What had he meant by that? Was someone in her inner circle feeding information to the opposition? Who was it? Rachel? Her legal team? Or had it been someone even closer to her, someone she had trusted implicitly? The next morning, Chloe met with Rachel to go over the new developments. She didn't mention the email or her conversation with Thomas. She had to be sure before making any accusations. "Everything's moving too quickly now," Chloe said, pacing around the office. "They're closing in. I can feel it. And I can't help but wonder, how much of this is coming from inside? Could there be someone close to us who's betraying us? Feeding information to the other side?" Rachel furrowed her brow. "You mean, like a leak?" "I don't know, Chloe. I trust everyone on our team. If anyone's trying to sabotage us, it's not anyone here. Chloe stopped pacing, her thoughts swirling. I thought so too. But after everything that's happened, I can't shake the feeling that someone is playing both sides. I can't afford to be naive. Rachel didn't respond immediately, but when she did, her voice was tinged with concern. I get it. But if someone's really working against us, we'll find them. Just don't let your paranoia get the best of you. We have to stay focused on the case. We're getting closer. We can't let anything distract us. Chloe nodded, though the doubt still gnawed at her. How could she stay focused when she wasn't even sure who was on her side anymore? Later that day, Chloe received another email. This time, there was no subject line. It was never about the case. You were always the target. Don't trust anyone, especially Rachel. She's working with them. You're being played. The words felt like a slap to the face. Chloe's heart pounded in her chest as she read them over and over. Was it true? Could Rachel really be involved in the plot to bring her down? Chloe's mind raced. She had trusted Rachel implicitly, but now she was questioning everything. That night, Chloe couldn't sleep. She stayed up in her apartment, staring at the documents spread out before her. The evidence was irrefutable, but the stakes were higher than she could have ever anticipated. The only thing she knew for sure was that there was someone in her circle she couldn't trust. The question was, who? As the night stretched on, Chloe's thoughts turned darker. The walls of her apartment seemed to close in on her, and she knew she couldn't do this alone anymore. She needed to find out the truth. And she needed to do it fast, before the people who had been pulling the strings found a way to destroy everything she had worked for. The tension was palpable, hanging heavy in the air like a storm cloud about to break. Chloe had never felt more alone, more uncertain about the people around her. As much as she had tried to convince herself that everything would work out, that they would win this fight for justice, the truth was dawning on her. This was no longer just about the case. It was about survival. And every time she thought she had one step ahead of the opposition, the ground beneath her shifted. Rachel had been the first person Chloe had turned to for help, the first person she had trusted without hesitation. But now, Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel was somehow involved in this web of deceit. The email, the warning from Thomas, and now the anonymous messages, it all pointed to something dark lurking just beneath the surface. Still, Chloe needed to act cautiously. She couldn't afford to make accusations without evidence. And yet, as the hours passed, it became harder and harder to ignore the gut feeling gnawing at her. What if Rachel was playing both sides? What if she was working with the very people Chloe was trying to expose? The next morning, Chloe arranged a private meeting with her legal team. She'd decided that, for now, Rachel would remain in the dark about her suspicions. If there was a traitor in their midst, Chloe needed to gather more information before she confronted anyone. Sitting in the conference room with her legal team, Chloe took a deep breath and began the meeting. We need to accelerate our strategy, she began, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. We're being attacked from every angle, and we need to hit back harder. We've been focusing on the public side of things, but we need to start thinking more tactically. We need to secure more evidence, but we also need to be careful. Someone could be leaking information to the opposition. There was a brief silence before one of the attorneys, Julia, spoke up. Are you suggesting we have a mole in the team? That's a bold claim. Chloe leaned forward, her eyes locked onto Julia's. I don't have proof yet, but I have reason to believe that someone on our side might be feeding information to the other side. We've been too careful not to expose everything, and yet every time we make a move, they seem to know about it before we even file. It's not a coincidence. The team exchanged uneasy glances. Chloe could see the doubt in their eyes, but she also knew that they couldn't afford to ignore the possibility. The stakes had escalated beyond the courtroom. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a war. That afternoon, Chloe's paranoia reached a boiling point. She couldn't ignore it any longer. She had to know if Rachel was involved. It was too risky to wait for more signs, she needed to confront her. She called Rachel and told her to meet her at a nearby cafe. It was a quiet place, away from prying eyes. As Chloe walked in, she spotted Rachel sitting at a corner table, her expression calm, but something in her posture, her rigid shoulders, gave her away. It was as if she was bracing for something. Chloe sat down across from her, her hands trembling as she folded them in front of her. "I've been thinking about everything that's happening," Chloe began, trying to keep her voice level. "The leaks, the threats, the smear campaign. Something isn't adding up, Rachel. I need to know what's really going on." Rachel blinked, but didn't say anything right away. Chloe's heart pounded as she watched her, waiting for a response. She could feel the tension in the air, thick, heavy. "What are you talking about, Chloe?" Rachel finally asked, her tone slightly defensive. "You know I'm on your side. I'm with you every step of the way." Chloe leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been getting messages. Warnings. Someone's been trying to sabotage this case from the inside. I don't know who, but I have a feeling it's someone close to me. Someone I trust." Rachel's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she quickly masked her surprise. "That's absurd. You think I'm behind this? After everything we've been through?" Chloe studied her face, searching for any sign of guilt, any crack in her facade. But Rachel's expression was unreadable, and for a moment, Chloe questioned her own instincts. Was she being paranoid? Was the pressure of the case making her see things that weren't there? But then the thought crossed her mind, what if Rachel was the one pulling the strings? What if everything had been a carefully crafted ruse from the start? Chloe wasn't sure how much longer she could play this game. She needed to know the truth, one way or another. "I don't know who to trust anymore," Chloe said quietly. "And right now, I don't even know if I can trust you." Rachel's expression faltered, her eyes flickering with something that Chloe couldn't place. For a brief moment, Chloe thought she saw a flash of guilt, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual calm demeanor. "You know I would never betray you," Rachel said softly, her voice sincere. But Chloe wasn't convinced. She had heard the same words from others before, people who had stabbed her in the back without warning. The conversation lingered in the air, heavy with uncertainty. Chloe didn't know if Rachel was guilty, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. She couldn't shake the thought that there was something Rachel wasn't telling her. The following days were marked by a cold, distant tension between Chloe and Rachel. Chloe kept her distance, trying to focus on the case, but her mind kept circling back to Rachel's words, her actions, her subtle shifts in behavior. There was something off. Chloe just couldn't put her finger on it. Late one evening, after hours of poring over legal documents, Chloe decided to take matters into her own hands. She was going to find the truth, no matter what it took. She would uncover the mole, expose the betrayal, and take back control. As she pulled up the surveillance footage from the office security system, she felt the pit in her stomach tighten. She was going to see who was meeting with whom, who was accessing what. She couldn't let paranoia control her any longer. This was the only way to know for sure. As Chloe reviewed the footage, her heart skipped a beat. There, in the footage from 3 days ago, was something she hadn't expected to see: Rachel, meeting with someone from the pharmaceutical company. They were in the back alley, speaking in hushed tones. The meeting lasted nearly 20 minutes, and Chloe could only make out snippets of their conversation, but the sight of Rachel meeting with the enemy was enough to make her blood run cold. Chloe's hands shook as she rewound the footage, watching it again and again. There was no denying it now. Rachel had been working with the enemy all along. Don't trust anyone, especially Rachel. The words from the anonymous email echoed in Chloe's mind. The betrayal she feared had come true. But now, Chloe had a choice. She could confront Rachel, expose the truth, and risk losing everything. Or she could use this information to turn the tables, to strike when it mattered most. One thing was certain, the fight for justice had just become personal. The truth was out. Chloe could feel it coursing through her veins, the sting of betrayal. It wasn't just that Rachel had been working against her, it was the fact that someone she trusted, someone who had been by her side through every twist and turn, had deceived her for so long. Chloe's mind raced as she tried to digest everything she had uncovered. Rachel, the person she had confided in, had been playing a game far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. But now, Chloe had to make a choice. She could expose Rachel, risk losing everything, her case, her reputation, or she could use the information to her advantage and finish what she had started. The stakes had never been higher. There was no turning back now. The following day, Chloe took a deep breath and made her decision. She wouldn't confront Rachel right away. Not yet. The case was too important, and there were still pieces to be put in place. The pharmaceutical company was a giant, and Judge Finn's was deeply entrenched in their pocket. If she was going to take them down, she needed to play this perfectly. Chloe had learned a lot during her years as a lawyer. She had learned to read people, to spot a lie in the smallest of gestures. And now, she knew exactly what to do. She had to turn the tables. But to do that, she needed to outsmart everyone. That morning, Chloe called an emergency meeting with her remaining legal team. She had made a plan, and she was determined to see it through. "We've been playing defense this whole time. It's time to go on the offense," she began. Her voice was calm but fierce, and she could feel the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders. Julia, one of her senior attorneys, looked at her warily. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "We need to find a way to expose the judge's ties to the pharmaceutical company. But we're not just going to do it publicly, we're going to take them down where it hurts the most. The only way we can do this is by going directly after Finn's financials. I'm talking about a full forensic audit. If we can prove the link between him and the company beyond a reasonable doubt, we'll have everything we need to destroy his career." The team exchanged nervous glances, but Chloe's eyes burned with determination. They were all in this together now, there was no turning back. But there was a problem. Chloe knew she couldn't do this without the support of someone on the inside. And that someone would have to be Rachel. It was a risk, but Chloe had no choice. Rachel had access to too much information. If she was going to use her, she had to make sure that she couldn't turn against her. That evening, Chloe arranged another meeting with Rachel. This time, there was no pretense. Chloe needed to know where Rachel stood, whether she was going to be an ally or an enemy. The cafe was quiet, just like before. But this time, Chloe's nerves were gone. She was ready for whatever Rachel would throw her way. When Rachel sat down across from her, she noticed that Rachel's eyes were guarded. She wasn't giving anything away. Chloe leaned in, staring directly into her eyes. "Rachel, I know what you've been doing. I know about your meetings with the pharmaceutical company," Chloe said, her voice low but steady. For a moment, Rachel didn't speak. Her face was a mask of indifference, but Chloe could see the slight twitch of her fingers, the way she clenched and unclenched her hands beneath the table. She was nervous, but Chloe could also sense that she wasn't entirely surprised by the confrontation. "You don't understand," Rachel finally said, her voice tight. "This isn't what you think it is. I never wanted to betray you." Chloe's jaw clenched. "Then why did you do it, Rachel? Why did you sell me out?" Rachel hesitated, and Chloe's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the moment when Rachel would either break or make her move. "I wasn't selling you out. I was trying to protect you," Rachel said, her voice cracking. "You don't realize how deep this goes. The people we're up against, they have power. They have resources. If I hadn't done what I did, they would have come after you, and your family. They would have destroyed you, Chloe. I didn't want that. I thought I was doing the right thing. Chloe's mind spun. By working with the very people who are destroying everything I've worked for. Rachel looked away, her voice shaking. You have no idea what it's like to be caught in the middle of this. I didn't have a choice. The anger inside Chloe flared, but she kept her voice calm. You always have a choice, Rachel. Always. The tension between them crackled, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. Chloe wasn't sure if Rachel was telling the truth or if she was just trying to cover her tracks. But one thing was clear, Rachel's betrayal went deeper than Chloe had realized. She had been playing a dangerous game, and Chloe wasn't sure if there was any way to trust her again. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Chloe's team worked around the clock, securing the necessary documents to prove Judge Finn's corruption. Rachel remained in the background, her role unclear. Chloe kept her close, unsure if she could fully trust her, but for now, she needed her. They couldn't afford any more mistakes. Then, it happened. Chloe and her team uncovered the evidence they needed, solid proof that Judge Finn's had been taking bribes from the pharmaceutical company for years. It was a smoking gun, and Chloe knew it was time to act. She arranged a press conference, gathering the media and everyone who had been following the case. The tension in the room was palpable as Chloe stepped up to the podium. She looked around at the faces staring back at her, reporters, journalists, and cameras trained on her every move. Chloe took a deep breath. This was it. The moment she had been fighting for. I stand before you today not just as a lawyer, but as someone who believes in justice, she began, her voice steady and strong. For too long, we have allowed corruption to fester in the highest places. For too long, we have let people like Judge Finn's destroy the lives of the innocent. But today, I have proof that he has been taking bribes from the very company whose actions he was supposed to be investigating. This is not just a case against one man. This is a battle for integrity, for justice, for the truth. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs, but Chloe stood firm, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when everything would change. Chloe watched as Judge Finn's was forced to step down in disgrace, his career destroyed. The pharmaceutical company was investigated, and their illegal practices were exposed. It wasn't just a victory for Chloe, it was a victory for everyone who had been wronged by the system. As Chloe walked out of the courthouse, a sense of relief washed over her. She had won. But as she looked out at the city, the weight of what had happened still lingered in her chest. The fight for justice was far from over. But for now, she had won. And that was enough. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. Have you ever fought for something you believed in? How did it change your life?